Hello, everyone. This is TJ Kennedy here from Fractional Source Podcast. Today, along with James and I, you have our guest, Bryce Stirton. Bryce is leading up an effort known as Funding Navigator that everybody in local government should be aware of. One of the questions I often get or hear is, is there a grant for that? Do we have a way to find other ways to help fund this new technology, this new capability, this thing that we're trying to get done? And it's gotten even more complicated in the last 12 months. So it's a great time for folks to learn more about Funding Navigator. It's something that those of us at Fractional Source certainly help advise cities and counties and others that are looking at how do they implement new projects and tools when they're looking at unique ways to fund it. So with that said, I'd like to have Bryce do a bit of an introduction on himself, and let's get started.
TJ and James, it's great to have this conversation with you all today. I really appreciate the opportunity. I love what you said. Is there a grant for this? I feel like that's been my El Dorado, maybe the last 5 years, working in public safety innovation, chasing that exact question, because so many of the departments and agencies that we work with really want that technology or really want to adopt that service. But of course, that funding barrier can prevent them from doing it. So then the natural question becomes, well, where do I go to get that money externally? And we have worked tirelessly with partners all over the country, at the federal level, at the state level, and the private sector to develop a solution that can answer that question for most public safety agencies. And we're expanding that to include other areas within local government as well. And so what we do is we take a look at, on a project by project basis, where the funding could come in at the local level from community grants, foundations, private corporations, things like that, at the state level and at the federal level. And we get these projects funded in ways that don't necessarily have to contribute from budget. And it's really exciting to see the impact that we've had and some of the lessons we've learned from the first 18 months of running this platform.
So on that note, what are some of the lessons that you've learned?
Right into it. Well, I mean, I think that for us, when we initially asked the question, is there a grant for that? The biggest answer is yes. We have over 6,000 grants in our platform that are just for public safety agencies and K through 12 organizations within local government. So that was a big question, right? That if the answer to that would have been no, I certainly wouldn't be here having this conversation with you all today. And I think what's even more compelling is it's not just that the grants are out there, but these projects are actually getting funded. And that's how we build our database. So instead of some of the other bigger, more national platforms that pull data from federal taxes and forms that come from that, we actually look at the local level, and every single time a local government reports a funded project or a completed project, we pull the data from that. And on average, our database gets about 150 funded projects a week, which is incredible and really exciting, and I think should be very motivating for most folks. So biggest lesson is that, yes, there probably is a grant for that, and even your neighbors are having success getting them. And so you should have confidence that not only can you find that funding, but that you can actually successfully go out there and get it.
I know one of the biggest issues for police chiefs, fire chiefs, city managers I talk to is just the knowledge of where to go, where to start, who should be working on this, what kind of person is assigned to do it. Does it need to be a high level person? Can it be a worker bee? Can it be a contractor? What are your thoughts on that? I think that's a really important starting point for folks.
Yeah, I love that question. And I do get asked that all the time, especially when we're working with vendors that are selling into local government. Hey, who should I target? Who should I be speaking with at that agency or at that department to follow up on the grant? And the answer is everyone. We work with admins that are super smart and ambitious, all the way up to chiefs that are willing to do the day-to-day grind, from everywhere in between. And we even work with retired personnel that want to come back and help out with their department and their local community. So anyone within that organization that's willing to put in a little bit of extra work can be the primary point of contact on these grants. Of course, grantors want to have other additional secondary points of contact for the actual administration with the grant, which can be a little bit more specific. But the work that goes into finding and preparing the grant applications can really be done by anyone within that organization that has the willpower to do it.
Bryce, what existed before Funding Navigator? I mean, where did people go for this information? And, obviously there was an opportunity there for you guys to step in. When did you see that sort of culminate?
Yeah, I like to look at our industry as very similar to the tax preparation industry in the 90s, right? So pre-TurboTax, when a lot of what we did was pen and paper and I got a guy, right? So, and even last week when we were at FRI in Orlando and we asked them, the smaller departments, what do y'all do for your grants? Or what do you do for your funding? Oh, we've got a guy. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with having someone in your local community that has your back. But I think what's important is there are over 100,000 grant writers in the US. It's so fragmented to the point to where a lot of information gets lost. It's very, very difficult for the guy that you have in your local neighborhood to keep track of all of the funding that's going on in the country. And so what our platform is designed to do is to bring that individual within your local community that you might be working with right now into the modern era where information moves so quickly and these opportunities move even quicker. And so you can be a part of that fast moving space with our platform without needing to swap out your local individual that you're working with. So to answer your question directly, what they were doing before us and what they're still doing today is a lot of manual work, a lot of pen and paper, a lot of stuff that's pretty inefficient and certainly leaves a lot of opportunity on the table.
When I hear all that manual work, it just screams at me, where are LLMs and AI to help solve this problem? And
just waiting for that one.
I'll have to ask, what are you implementing today? What are you suggesting people do or don't do so far?
We're very conservative with the LLMs and the AI. I think that we've done a little bit of testing, just more conversationally. We aren't actually putting out applications like this, but the grantor community and who is actually funding these projects are terrified of the incoming wave of all these applications that are basically spam to them. And so authenticity is a word that we hear over and over and over again. And so I think that for these departments that have that individual that they're working with, it's ironic because in a lot of ways, it's becoming even more important now today. And in public safety, especially, as AI takes over, I think the human element is going to be even more important than ever, which I love that irony, right? Because how can you differentiate yourself, your project, your community, your organizations from everyone else with these really competitive grants? It's not going to be through ChatGPT. That is not how you're going to convey your community needs and your specific differentiators. It's going to be through the people that live and breathe in that community. So we really want to try to make it easier for them to tell that story through our technology, but we want to make sure we maintain the authenticity in the process. So the shortcuts hopefully are not something that we're going to be a part of. I think that when we're talking about the amount of money here, that if you do try to take those shortcuts, it might work in the short run, but long term here, we really want to see long term funding strategies that work, and that needs to be, human led.
That's an interesting perspective, Bryce. I think so. We've seen this in a couple of places where there's an overcorrection towards automation, and some of them, and specifically like if you look at job applications, right? People are being inundated. Mm-hmm. Recruiters are being inundated with applications that probably didn't exist 2 years ago because people didn't have these shortcut tools. At the same time, like you said, you have a massive amount of data that you're seeing coming in to the platform, and certainly when there's a trove of data like that, and thinking about public sector in general, and how public sector, for the most part, both federal, state, or all federal, state, and local, typically don't capitalize on data in a way that your OpenAI might at some point, right? Have you thought about what you'd want to do with that data from an intelligence perspective? Or obviously, it feeds the platform and helps you sort of curate the market, so to speak. But like, what other things are you seeing in terms of technology trends from Funding Navigator's perspective, where that data can be accretive, right?
Yeah, I think that is really interesting. And I hope that someday in the future that data can be informative at a policy level to make sure that communities that don't have a great voice right now to inform where some of these federal dollars go can actually be a part of that conversation. Where we're focused right now is making life easier for our users. So from a data perspective, our focus right now is to say, if you put some form of information into our platform, or we gather that information and put it in there for you on your behalf, you won't need to do that again. You'll be able to apply that to other grants, other projects, other years, to where it's easier to do. So I think that being able to recall that information using LLMs and AI models in a way that any user can come in for that organization and say, hey, what did we do last year for this? Or what did we do 2 years ago for this? Making it easier for them to have access to their own data is our priority right now. And so that is pretty complicated because, of course, we want to make it to where, going back to one of our earlier questions, who manages this? We want to make it to where the organization using our platform can have some change in that individual. One of the benefits of having it to where anyone can do it is also one of the issues, because that anyone can do it can move on, or they could get promoted and they might not have time to do it again the next year. And so how we organize this information so that anyone within that organization can access it in a timely manner is really important for us. And it's been a big challenge to get that right.
So let's talk a little bit about the how for our listeners out there. So let's say on the average fire EMS or law enforcement agency, and I want to go invest this year in virtual reality training tools for my department. And I go to the Funding Navigator website, and what does it take to sign up? What do I do once I'm in there? How do I search and find opportunities? Just kind of walk me through it like I'm a new agency.
Yeah, great question. And that's something that right now is pretty restrictive. But as we grow and as the technology elements get added to our platform, we hope to expand that and democratize it a lot. But right now, what we have is a handhold model where an expert on our team will work with you on that process. So you'll come in, you'll talk to us about the project, we'll gather data on that. And if you have a specific vendor in mind that you want to work with, sometimes we can work with that vendor, and it's a completely free process for the agency or the department. If you want to do it on your own, then there could be a cost associated with that because we are going to be doing a lot of work. That work that starts is research-based. So we'll gather all the information we can about the project, and then we'll do research about the funding opportunities. And the things that we're going to consider are, of course, the size of the project, the community impact component of the project, your timeline, things like that. If it's an urgent need, we'll look to your community and we'll try to source that a lot faster than if it's something that maybe you can do in a year or two where we can wait for federal opportunities to open up. After we do the research and we identify the funding, then you're able to go through our platform and add information as needed to put together a very genuine and authentic application in the easiest way that we can think of. We've helped do over 2,000 of these projects. We've made a lot of changes in that process based on a ton of feedback from the industry. So it starts with research, then it gets into the application, then we get into submission. And then hopefully from there, it becomes an award management component that our team can help you with. Every step of the process right now is technology enabled, but human led. And that's very, very important for us. You have a primary point of contact and expert on our team that you can ask questions, big or small, throughout the process so that it feels easy, but also something that doesn't become you're guesstimating as to what's right. You're making sure that you're doing it right. And that could be, hey, what are the implications of receiving money from this organization, right? We might need to look into what are the requirements of accepting that grant funding. Sometimes it's pretty important and pretty major. And so we always want to make sure that we're in front of that in the process. And that's something that's human led for us right now.
You're on mute, TJ. Sorry.
My bad. So the first step for an agency would be to go to fundingnav.org and click on schedule a consultation. And that's how they would hook up with you, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So in that conversation, you'll speak with someone on our team who has expertise on project funding, and we'll get a better sense of if that project is a good fit for our platform first and foremost. and then what the process is going to look like, set proper timelines and goals. It's not an easy process from a time standpoint, right? I think we wish that we could say, hey, we can turn around in a few weeks and get this done, but we want to set proper expectations and make sure that the knowledge is understood on our end and then conveyed to the user's end. And that happens all in a quick 15-20 minute consultation.
Great.
Yeah, and there's some great testimonials on your website from users, right? And so grantee reaction has obviously been positive. How is the grantor community, like where the funding is actually coming from? Have you worked with any organizations directly, or has it sort of been acting more of a sort of middleware between the user and the grantee and the grantor?
Yeah, grantor relationships is something that long term we really hope to be able to focus on. In the short term, we've spent most of our time working at the organization level, at the agency level, especially within local government. We're a small team, and so we've had to pick and choose there. We've certainly had a lot of introductions to the grantor community, but we've really focused on introducing our customers, our users to the grantors, and having the relationship building component be within the grantor and the grantee. And so our place is much more as a middle component right now. Long term, hopefully we can do more with that. But I think these grantors, especially at the federal level right now, are playing a lot of catch up. This has been a crazy year. There's 1.1 trillion in federal dollars that flow into state and local government through grants every single year. It's a ton of money. And a lot of things have happened this year that have changed where that money's going, how it's going. Even money that was committed has been changed. So I think right now, when we come in and say, hey, we have this cool new technology, they're like, yeah, we don't care. We don't have time for that. We're trying to figure out what's going to happen next week. We're not too focused on what's going to happen next year, which I understand and I appreciate. It's a really tough job, and there are some amazing people within the grantor community. At the local level, it's been really interesting to see how grantors have stepped up, understanding that there is a little bit of a gap this year that needs to be filled, that maybe federal dollars that flowed in for pretty important projects are not flowing right now. So we've seen a lot of grantors that have spoken up, whether it's through email or social media posts or reaching out and saying, hey, we're here. We want to do our best. We certainly can't match dollar for dollar, but we can absolutely step up and do our best. And I think that's what's great about our country in general, right? When there are these gaps, there are these holes, we as communities work together to solve them. And it's been really compelling to see from the grantor community this year.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And from a grant ecosystem perspective, understanding that you have, non-federal sources to not supplant or replace federal grants, but help to, act as a close some gaps potentially. And it's not just gaps from funding going away. Like we've seen application timelines shorten drastically, right? I think down to like 2 weeks, which, most of the grantees are used to 30, 45, 90 days. So to me, it seems like Funding Navigator is obviously well positioned to help navigate what is right now, I would say from the federal perspective, potentially a volatile environment because you don't know when things are hitting. You don't know what's coming. Having that situational awareness is really critical. But the other piece, pointing grantees to places that they might consider non-traditional, right? Like I know you have the Gary Sinise Foundation is featured on the Funding Navigator page. And for those of us in grants, we kind of know what some of these resources are. But if you're in a small rural firehouse or police agency or even just EMS trying to figure out what the next equipment grant is, like this is a really useful place to go to. On that note, like what would your first piece of advice be to someone who is new to grants and trying to figure out, step one for their agency, just from where you sit?
I think you need a plan. I think now more than ever, it's important that funding is looked at as a part of the job. And I know it's not a fun part of the job, right? Just like we don't like managing our taxes, it's something that we have to take seriously. And just about every organization we work with comes into this saying, here are a project or two that we need to fund. And we do our job well if they leave with not just that project funded, but a plan for how they're going to fund similar projects like that in the future. And a lot of that has to do with just getting organized on your end. How are you tracking these projects that you need? How are you tracking the available funding that's out there? How are you tracking when those funding opportunities open? And how are you prioritizing accordingly? And who's managing that within your organization, right? So it certainly isn't a monumental task that you can't do on your own if you don't want to use a service like ours. But that's what we're designed to do, is to make it a lot easier for you to build and professionalize that plan. And then more importantly, the second piece is execute on it, right? What's really tough, like you said, is these funding opportunities and these funding windows are weeks, they're not months. So getting organized, getting in front of that, making sure that you have things like your SAM.gov, all that stuff set up properly, it's not expired, so that you can take advantage of these short windows is really, really important. So having a plan, being ready to execute on that plan, and then hopefully having a team around it that can help you stay accountable to those things and make it easier for you. Certainly difficult to manage in this environment. But if we look at what's happened to city budgets over the last 15, 20 years, it shows us just how important this side of the puzzle is for most agencies across the country, right? It used to be that city budgets, we were running these surpluses, and grant funding was more of a luxury. Now, where 2/3 of America's largest cities are running a deficit, the average U.S. city runs about a 19% deficit. It was about a 30% surplus 20 years ago. You have to look at grants as a critical piece of everything that you do in an annual basis for your organization. And if you don't have a plan, you aren't organizing that, we've seen a lot of money get left on the table. So I think it's a very, very important time. The last piece I'll say on that is trends show us it's going the wrong way, right? So if we're hoping that this will solve itself, I think that's probably a misguided aspiration. I hope it does. I think we all do, but I don't think that's appropriate to prepare and plan based off of.
Yeah, and grants cost money, right? At the end of the day, I mean, from like our perspective at Fractional Source, right, TJ? Like, you actually need people to go in some cases and create a parallel path to your daily operations to just go and source some of those grants. And the deficit problem in and of itself makes it more of a priority. So we're acutely aware of those issues. Bryce, it's a good point.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why I love what you all are doing in this environment right now. Challenges are harder, right? If there's money everywhere, we can make maybe mistakes. We can do things where we hire more people to solve problems, throw bodies at the problem, throw money at the problem. But I don't think we're in that environment anymore. The good news is technology is coming, as we've talked about, that's going to make it easier to execute. But the strategy side of that has to be nailed. And so to have experts that can come in like you all, and they can help establish that strategy so that you can then execute in the right way, that's, again, something that I personally believe has gone from a luxury to a necessity in our current environment. It's going to be even more like that in the future, for better or worse.
Well, I think to follow on to your point of both James and Bryce here, I think your point that somebody in the leadership of every community, whether that's a city, a county, a special service district, that is looking at how to fill that budget hole. I always think of it as there's always a gap, right? You just talked about the average deficit being 19%. If we were to say, okay, that 19% hole, how do you fill it? The traditional way is just cut. And sometimes that is the answer. I'm not saying that's wrong depending on your particular community. But what I'm seeing from a realistic standpoint in most communities is that they're mostly solving it with vacancies because they're having a hard time recruiting. They're having a hard time retaining. But then that means you're not filling a firehouse. That means you're not paving the roads because your public works department isn't fully staffed. Well, whatever that is a real problem. And you can get away with that short term. It's not a long-term solution. So one of the things we're seeing smart city managers, county managers, other leaders do, chief financial officers, is bring in a fractional leader to say, hey, these are the gaps that I have. Could you help us figure out where are the grant opportunities and what are the things we should be looking at, or the unique staffing or technology models that can help fill the gap? And sometimes it's technology can do some of the roles that are not able to be filled. It's not that we want to take away a job. It's a job that's not being filled, right? It's not being done. And so how do we take some of that vacancy fund that are on the table and use that for a fractional leader that can help solve this problem in a long-term way? Come up with a strategy to go after 3 or 4 key grants that are going to fill that gap. Come after a strategy that's going to talk about how technology or shifting of resources or realignment can really help make a difference. And that seems to really make a big difference, whether that community is small, medium, or even larger.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And we see that reflected very well on our piece of the puzzle. We have so much demand for personnel grants, and there's just not much funding out there. Grants are not going to be the solution there. And so the fact that you all are putting out an alternative to just a bunch of hiring makes a tremendous amount of sense to me, based on the needs that we've seen on our end. And so I think that's really smart that there's now a new tool that's available.
Well, to your point, Bryce, the very few grants out there today fund human resources, right? Very few are funding police officers, firefighters, city government employees. There used to be a lot of that. I remember when I was in public safety 20 plus years ago, numerous chunks of the department were being paid for through federal grants or state grants that were funded by federal sources. And most of those have dried up or they're few and far between. And what's nice on the fractional front too is that you don't have to have a long-term commitment. I think often we get into employees and then dealing with layoffs or dealing with shrinkages in the size of an organization, and that's a pretty depressing place to be. Rather than, hey, let's get a fraction of somebody in here that can go ahead and really look at this problem, help us solve it long term.
Yeah, it makes sense. Makes a ton of sense.
Well, and people come with tools too, right? So the other thing that we're always mindful of is, the introducing new technology in this space is always difficult. Whether it be because you're not on a particular CIO's whitelist or because people haven't done the market research. And in many cases, there's a lag from public sector to private sector in terms of accessibility for certain tools. And I mean, just lowering the barrier of understanding what software as a service is, or what web-based tools can be available to anyone just through a simple registration or license fee. And so when we talk about funding Navigator, for example, getting the word out that there's an easier way, frankly, than just going and poking around grants.gov or hitting Google or, to as much as we want to use AI, maybe it's not going to give you all the right resources. It's certainly not going to do, it's not going to build you the roadmap and help you get through the various phases. And if you're new to grants, it can be a very daunting experience. And in my experience, I've had almost 20 years around grants. The first 10 years of my career in the government were grants and contracts. So, seeing it from the inside out, and every day running into a new system, new platform, new tool that the government has designed or been part of the design, it creates this patchwork of solutions that ultimately has diminishing returns, right? So when we think about funding Navigator as a single source of truth for grants, in many ways, that in and of itself is a novel thing to bring to an agency that may just not have their head up enough to say, oh, this is actually a thing that I can use, and I can actually not just go and get additional grants. It's the market intelligence, it's the human interaction that you talk about, and frankly, it's a force multiplier for folks who this is probably another duty is assigned, right? In many cases. So I think all of those benefits are really important, and it's one of those things where people take for granted the federal financial assistance market in and of itself, but all the other parts of that ecosystem that you're able to access and bring to users, I think is honestly a critical feature for grantees these days.
There's so many hats that a leader of a local organization has to wear, right? And I think sometimes that can probably be pretty overwhelming and be a little ridiculous if you try to wear them all. And so the areas where you can find fractional expertise or software solutions that can help you, where you can wear the app that you want to wear, you need to wear the most without having to swap it out all the time, is really, hopefully, like you said, going to give additional benefits beyond just that one thing, right? So it'll allow you to spend your time in other areas. It'll allow you to focus on other areas where you're good, where you want to be. And I certainly talk to a lot of people, especially in like fire service or law enforcement. They do not want to spend time on grants, just like I don't want to spend time on taxes.
Right.
So finding a partner that you can trust, that you can be in this on a year in and year out basis, that you can trust is helping you get most of the money that's out there, I think can have returns in other areas as well. And that's something that we want to deliver. The best way that we know how to deliver it is to make it as easy as possible.
Something that you probably thought of this, Bryce, but like you kind of alluded to this. There's obviously the shift at what we can call a macro level from a funding perspective in the federal government. But there's also an institutional knowledge piece. Those program officers and grant techs that you used to call as a grantee for assistance at any phase in that grant application, award, or monitoring process, or even closeout, has been cut. There are resources that are just not there anymore from a people perspective, and the federal government hasn't done enough, I think, to offset that with fundamental chatbot, right? Just some simple interactive tools online, for example, to get you an answer, or to shore up resources with additional staff or reassignment of staff. So there's a gap, again, that I think you probably potentially fill for your customers that you probably didn't realize was going to be a really critical function to this at this point, right? So, maybe you can talk a little about that if you thought through that at all.
Yeah, I know, and I think it's it's one that we're really passionate about, because the organizations that are impacted by that are smaller. It's the volunteer fire departments, right, where that knowledge is internal, or the smaller law enforcement communities that are more rural, underserved. They're even more underserved today. And so, that's definitely an area that we're really passionate about. The larger cities have muscle memory, they have reps, they have internal expertise because they've done it before. And so they can do without that support. But the communities that don't have that, these underserved communities in a lot of ways, are just smaller organizations that those are the ones that we're really focused on helping when it comes to the logistics of this, and making sure that they're aware, hey, this funding's out there. It's only going to be out there for 2 more weeks. You better get the application out. I think that's become a really important piece of the puzzle for us.
One other element that I think is important that rides right on the back of this is when I was a leader in operational public safety, you would get these grants, and a lot of my agencies, thrived on them, whether it was EMS, it was fire, it's law enforcement. It was a huge portion of our funding. But what was always missing back in my day anyway was somebody to run the grant, right? So, there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of follow-up, there's a lot of documentation. The average operational person probably isn't prepared to do that. The second thing is there's a lot of procurement that happens. Whether it's getting 3 bids, it's using a group purchasing contract, it's leveraging a way to get things under contract for vendors, and maybe even expensive stuff way above what you normally buy, $1 million piece of technology or something. And so I think there's also this element of making sure you have expertise, i.e. people who have done this before in other agencies, who can help you with the change management of that technology, can help you, make sure you're compliant on the grant paperwork, so you don't end up owing money having to be paid back or something down the road. And then third, having that ability to go procure it and do that procurement, appropriately, so that you get the right technology in the right place.
It's a tough job. And then you got to go do your day job, right? You got to actually respond.
That's outside of the normal 40 hours, right?
Yeah. You got to run into a burning building in between that. It's a very tough job. And I think that if you're looking at that job and you hear externally technologies doing this and that, it's probably pretty frustrating. It's like, well, where's this technology for me? I'm still trying to wear all these hats and do all these things, and it's still really hard. And so hopefully there's just one sliver of that puzzle that we can help solve.
No, I agree. And I think agencies have to be smart about it, that, they're so short on operational personnel today, and people are already working overtime to fill shifts that are mandatory staffing, that, really this is something that should be contracted out for the most part. There's better efficient ways to get it done.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. I think it's very well said.
So Bryce, what's next for Funding Navigator?
We want to continue funding critical projects, right? Do it as much as we can, as often as we can, work with as many departments and agencies as we can. we're not rocket scientists or trying to do some, put people on Mars or anything like that. We want to keep it simple. We want to just have simple tools that make it easier to fund these critical projects day in and day out. So what's for us is we want to do it with as many organizations and as many projects as we can. And we want to learn, what are ways that we can adapt and make it easier in the process. But for us, it's keep it simple, fund these projects, and work with as many departments in the process as we can.
I think to wrap this up, why don't we ask Bryce here for if you had one piece of advice for a city manager, a county manager, a department head about grants, what's that most important piece of advice you wish they would have?
That's a good question. I think that I'll answer the easiest one is the departments that we see that are the most successful are the ones that are prepared with a plan, and so they can get in front of these short application windows and they can take advantage of the unique funding sources that pop up. The second one is we're seeing a lot of competitive movement towards regional applications. So these cities that are major players, they're able to access federal funding because they know what to do. These smaller organizations that have a little bit less experience in that, or maybe a little bit less pull, are pooling together and they're doing projects at a regional level. And there's been a lot of success with that. So I think that being planned, prepared, and then being willing to collaborate within your community is really impactful.
Yeah, I think those are both great pieces of advice. One, be prepared to submit fast turnarounds because a lot of times too, grants have a very structured deadline and you can actually get a lot more funding if you're prepared and ready to get in on an opportunity, number one. And then number two is, and I think we see this across all city and county government, but also public safety in particular, that regional applications almost always do better. Work with surrounding cities, special service districts, counties, multiple counties getting together, work with the state. Anytime you can get all of public safety or all of a region to work together, it definitely seems to bolster people wanting to provide funding.
Yes, exactly right. Well said.
No, that's terrific. Well, Bryce, we really appreciate you coming on the Fractional Source podcast here today and helping to share more about Funding Navigator. I think a lot of people know about it, but I think a lot more should be leveraging it. And there's a great opportunity for them to reach out to you and your experts to give them capabilities they just don't have. And we just really appreciate you coming on today to help share that.
Well, thank you all so much for the opportunity to do it. As James said earlier, fundingnav.org. You can go, you can set up a consultation, and our team would love to learn about the projects you have, the community that you serve, and see how we can help. But thank you all so much for the time. I really appreciate it. And I learned a lot. So thanks for sharing your knowledge here today.
Thanks, Bryce.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, Bryce.